Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into a case, a cold case file that's just incredibly heartbreaking. And the timing is so bizarre.
It really is. A story where, all the noise and excitement of a huge national holiday kind of hid this awful, intimate act of violence.
Exactly. We're exploring the unfinished story of Jill-Lyn Euto. It's a murder really defined by, well, betrayed trust. And it happened on a day the whole country was watching football.
And these kinds of cases, where the violence is extreme but there's no sign of forced entry, they leave this really chilling shadow.
Yeah.
It doesn't point to some random monster in the dark. It suggests, chillingly, that the monster was invited inside. We're going to really get into the evidence, the scene, and the extraordinary, just tragic fight for justice led by Jill-Lyn's mother.
Okay, let's start right there. The date, the atmosphere, we're calling this first part, the bloody Super Bowl Sunday that shattered a mother's world forever.
So the day is Sunday, January 28th, 2001. We're in Syracuse, New York, and the whole country is gearing up for Super Bowl XXXV, Baltimore Ravens versus the New York Giants. It's a day full of noise, distraction, people cooking, getting ready for parties, just anticipation.
And Jill-Lyn and her sister Jenna, they were actually Denver Broncos fans, right? So they were probably rooting against the Giants anyway.
Exactly. A little family rivalry element there, too.
And in the middle of all that, collective noise, in the near northeast part of Syracuse, an 18-year-old's life was just violently ended. Jill-Lyn Euto, everyone says she was this vibrant young woman, really on the edge of making her dreams happen.
Fiercely independent is how she's described. She just recently gotten her own place, a studio apartment, 6th floor of this 8-story high-rise building at 600 James Street.
That's a big deal at 18.
Huge. A really big step for her. And she was clearly motivated, building a future.
And she wasn't just like working a retail job at Aeropostale either. She had serious career goals.
Yeah, the sources show she was actively studying, wanted to become a paramedic. She'd even started filing paperwork with medical agencies, specifically hoping, it seems, to work for rural Metro. She had a plan.
A clear path. But importantly, even with this new independence, she was still really close with her family. Her mom, Joanne Browning, and her younger sister, Jenna.
Yeah, very connected. And that close family tie is actually what defines the last known moments of Jill-Lyn's life.
Okay, so talk about that last call.
Right. That morning, Sunday morning, around 11:00 a.m., Jill-Lyn calls her mom and sister at their place on Butternut Street.
Just checking in, confirming plans for the game later.
Exactly. She was planning to go over there later that afternoon, watch the Super Bowl with them. Family tradition,
Okay.
So Jenna picks up the phone. She was 17 at the time. Their mother, Joanne, was busy. She was getting ready to run out the door, grab some last-minute groceries for the game.
So Jenna tells Jill-Lyn that.
Yeah, Jenna basically just relayed the message, Mom can't talk right now, we're heading out. A quick, normal kind of exchange.
Oh, but you hear that and you immediately feel the weight of it, don't you? Jenna later said that exact moment, just cutting the conversation short. She called it one of my biggest regrets.
It's that kind of small, agonizing detail that just haunts people after something sudden and violent happens. That feeling of, if only. If they just talked one more minute, if they hadn't rushed out for groceries, maybe, just maybe, something would have been different.
It really speaks to the human side of these tragedies, doesn't it? That awful realization that the last time you spoke to someone, you had no idea it was the last time.
Absolutely, and Jill-Lyn never made it over to Butternut Street for the game that evening.
Which would have immediately set off alarm bells, right? She wasn't the type to just blow off family plans.
Especially the Super Bowl.
No, definitely not. So calls to her apartment started going unanswered, unreturned. All through Sunday night and then into Monday morning. The worry just started building and building fast.
And then Monday morning, January 29th, that worry turned into something much worse. Acute dread, really. Right. Joanne Browning called Jill-Lyn's job Aeropostale, and they confirmed her worst fear. Jill-Lyn hadn't shown up for her shift that Monday.
That was it then, the point of no return.
Joanne and Jenna immediately drove over to 600 James Street. To her apartment on the 6th floor. And this is where that awful truth hits.
Yeah.
That silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just confirmation of violence. This is the moment we call. No broken locks, no screams, just silent betrayal.
And the first clue, the door wasn't locked.
The door was unlocked. That's the first huge piece of physical evidence.
Yeah.
Right away, it steers the investigation away from just a random break-in.
Okay, so Joanne goes in.
Joanne went in first. And she found Jill-Lyn lifeless. On the futon in the living room area, the injuries were Horrific.
Savage.
Multiple stab
Multiple
wounds.
stab wounds. Chest, back, neck, and also a deep, large cut to her neck. Just brutal.
Oh my God. And Jenna was right there. Jenna was with her, yes. But the sources are clear. Joanne's first instinct, that immediate maternal reaction, was to shield Jenna. She physically prevented her younger daughter from seeing the full horror of the scene.
Before calling 911.
Before frantically calling 911, yes.
Signing your daughter like that and having to protect your other daughter from it at the same time, I can't even imagine.
It's unimaginable. Police arrived, secured the scene, confirmed Jill-Lyn was deceased. And that discovery, carried out by the two people who loved her most, it just sets the stage for this 6-year quest for justice that Joanne Browning undertook. A quest that tragically ended with her own death.
That intimacy of the discovery really underscores the personal nature of this crime, doesn't it? Which brings us to the crime scene itself.
Exactly. But before we dig into the forensics of this really intimate murder, if you're finding yourself drawn into cases like Jill-Lyn's, these stories that just cry out for justice after years of silence, we really hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Whisper of Crime.
Yeah, and please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, basically all the podcast platforms. Like this deep dive, leave a comment, share it. Your engagement really does help get these cold cases more attention. It keeps the pressure on.
It really does. Also, make sure to check out our other deep dives. We cover a lot of gripping cases that still need answers.
Okay, so back to that 6th floor apartment. The crime scene itself gave the police some profound, terrifying clues right away. They knew almost immediately this wasn't a robbery gone bad or some random attack. This is where we talk about the kitchen knife that knew its victim's secrets.
Right. The initial analysis, it established some key facts that shaped the investigation right from the start. First, the time of death. Estimated relatively early in the day, actually, sometime between 12:00 p.m. and 3:00 p.m. on that Sunday, January 28th.
Noon to 3 on Super Bowl Sunday. That's the peak time for pregame stuff, right? Tailgate starting, people cooking, TVs blasting.
Exactly. That timing is incredible. If the murder happened in that 3-hour window, it means the violence occurred precisely when the surrounding community was likely making the most noise, creating the most distraction.
Wow. Okay. What else did they find right away?
The second critical fact, the murder weapon. It was identified as one of Jill-Lyn's own kitchen knives.
Her own knife. Not something the killer brought.
Correct. A weapon of convenience. Something found and used right there at the scene.
Okay, so let's put those two things together. No forced entry, the door is unlocked, and the weapon was hers, already in the apartment. What's the immediate conclusion for investigators?
It leads straight to what we're calling the someone she knew theory. Trust is the ultimate weapon. The killer didn't break in. They were let in. Or maybe they even had a key access.
Right.
And they didn't bring a weapon with them, which suggests the attack itself was either spontaneous, like an argument that escalated horribly, or it arose from some kind of sudden, intense confrontation right there.
It points strongly toward murder with domestic familiarity, then. Someone comfortable in that space.
Absolutely. But I see you hesitating. You're thinking about the violence level.
Yeah, I mean, I have to push back a little on the idea of pure spontaneity. Because the sources describe the scene as very messy, multiple savage stab wounds, plus that cut to the neck. That level of violence feels like more than just a quick argument that got out of hand over, I don't know, money or something simple. It sounds like rage.
You're absolutely right to point that out. That's the really difficult contradiction in this case. You have a seemingly spontaneous tool, her own knife, but it's used in this incredibly rage-filled way.
Yeah.
The sheer number of wounds, the nature of them, it strongly suggests extreme anger, or like Jill-Lyn's uncle, Steve Sommier, put it, some kind of absolute vengeance.
Vengeance. So a deep personal motive. Something simmering before that noon to 3 p.m. window, even if the actual decision to kill wasn't made until that moment.
That seems much more likely, doesn't it? A pre-existing grievance, a deep-seated anger that just exploded in that time frame, using the most readily available weapon.
And her uncle also mentioned something really tragic, that Jill-Lyn trusted easily.
That characteristic. Her openness, her willingness to let people into her life, into her home. It seems like that trust was fundamentally used against her. It became the weapon the killer leveraged.
Using her trust, her apartment, her own knife.
Yeah.
It feels like someone who felt entitled to be there, right? Comfortable enough in her private space to turn it against her.
Entitled is a good word for it. or at least familiar enough not to raise any alarms just by being there.
Okay, let's talk about the setting itself, because the logistics of that apartment building, 600 James Street, they just make the whole thing even more mysterious. It's an 8-story high-rise, right? On a busy street in Syracuse.
Yeah, bustling place. And this environment creates that crucial question we're calling the missing force. Why no broken entry speaks volumes, but also why no noise?
Exactly. We know from someone who used to live there that the walls were thin, like paper thin sometimes. Neighbors apparently heard arguments occasionally. And her floor, the 6th floor, had maybe 6 to 8 apartments on it.
Height.
So given the extreme violence, we're talking about a messy scene, multiple stabbings, how did nobody hear anything? A struggle, screams, even just the sounds of a fight escalating.
That's the core problem that stumped investigators for years?
Yeah.
How does this level of violence happen seemingly undetected?
We have to go back to the timing again, don't we? Noon to 3 p.m., Super Bowl Sunday. Yeah. Is it actually possible that all the background noise TVs turned up loud, people having their own small gatherings, maybe shouting at the pregame shows, could have completely masked the sounds of a murder next door?
It's not just possible, it's probably the leading theory for how it went unheard. What we're calling Super Bowl cheers masked a killer's perfect timing. If the killer knew Jill-Lyn and knew her building, knew her routine, which seems very likely they might have chosen that window deliberately, knowing that the usual neighborhood watchfulness, people noticing strange sounds, would be totally dulled by the holiday noise and distraction.
Okay, that makes sense for how the crime itself went unnoticed. But then there's the escape. This was a bloody, violent attack. The killer would almost certainly have had blood on them. Evidence. How do you walk out of a busy 8-story apartment building covered in blood in the middle of a Sunday afternoon and not get seen?
The exits become absolutely critical here. The main front lobby of 600 James Street. It's described as large, lots of glass, leading right out onto that busy street.
Highly visible.
Extremely visible. A killer covered in blood trying that route, especially with people potentially coming and going for Super Bowl plans. The risk of being spotted would be huge. Highly unlikely they went that way.
So where else could they go? The back.
The analysis points strongly towards the back stairwell. That former resident mentioned a more concealed, kind of industrial-style back stairwell, often had heavy metal doors closing it off on each floor.
Okay.
And importantly, that route leads down to the basement, past the laundry room, and eventually out to the back parking lot exit. Much less foot traffic, much more concealed.
That seems like the logical escape route, but didn't the sources also say the elevator was kind of unreliable, meaning people use the stairs more often?
They did mention that. The elevator was apparently slow, broke down a lot. So residents probably did use the stairs pretty frequently, even the back ones.
So even the back stairwell wasn't a completely guaranteed clear path?
Not guaranteed at all. The killer would have needed incredible luck. Or, again, that really intimate knowledge of the building's patterns. Maybe knowing exactly when the laundry room tended to be empty or when maintenance wasn't around. Yeah. Timing it perfectly.
It paints a picture of someone incredibly focused, calculated during the escape, even if the attack itself was rage-fueled. If the killer was an acquaintance, maybe a boyfriend, maybe even another resident in the building, they'd know those rhythms.
Exactly. The fact that they got away clean, despite how messy the crime scene was, suggests the timing, the location, the weapon choice, and the escape route were all executed with a chilling precision. It really reinforces the Syracuse apartment that held deadly intimacy.
And the person responsible just melted back into the Super Bowl chaos, probably living right there among the people mourning Jill-Lyn, which immediately put everyone close to her into the suspicious circle. Everyone she trusted became a suspect for the police, even if they couldn't say so publicly.
That sense of betrayal is just overwhelming, isn't it? And it's what fueled this incredible, relentless 6-year battle for justice waged by one person, Jill-Lyn's mother, Joanne Browning.
Yeah, we absolutely have to talk about Joanne. She became the engine driving this case. Her story is just one of unbelievable dedication, but it's also layered with so much prior loss already.
That's such a critical piece of context. Jill-Lyn's murder wasn't the first blow to this family, not by a long shot.
Right, they'd already been through so much.
Immense loss, just shortly before. Jill-Lyn's maternal grandfather died in 1999. Then her maternal grandmother passed away in 2000. So Jill-Lyn's murder in early 2001 was the third major family tragedy in just over 2 years. They were already reeling.
And then Joanne finds her daughter like that. The sources say she was basically unable to work afterward, went out on stress-related disability.
Professionally paralyzed by the trauma and grief. But instead of just retreating, she launched this huge public, tireless campaign. She became the mother who found death and refused to let it win.
Her efforts were just monumental, weren't they? Way beyond what you might typically see.
Truly extraordinary. She wasn't just, calling the police for updates now and then. The sources say she was calling investigators 5 to 6 times a day.
5 or 6 times a day. Wow.
And making regular in-person visits to the Syracuse Police Department. Just relentlessly keeping Jill-Lyn's case front and center. Refusing to let it become just another cold case file gathering dust.
And it wasn't a quiet fight either. This was Joanne Browning's 6-year war against silence, and she fought it out in the open. She clearly understood that keeping it in the public eye, building momentum, creating pressure, that was her best weapon.
Absolutely. She generated so much visible public awareness. Pink was Jill-Lyn's favorite color, so Joanne made sure pink ribbons and flyers were plastered everywhere. She was proactive online, too, creating a website Justice for Jill-Lyn, using it to share information, appeal for tips, just keep the story alive digitally.
And the billboards, too. That's a big commitment.
2 prominent billboards in the Syracuse area dedicated just to her daughter's case. Think about the effort, the planning, probably the financial strain involved in that, especially for someone out of work on disability.
She was just completely determined.
Utterly. She helped establish a $13,000 reward fund for information that led directly to a conviction, and then she took it national. She appeared on TV shows like The Montel Williams Show and, crucially, America's Most Wanted.
Going on national TV like that takes incredible courage, doesn't it? Making yourself so vulnerable, reliving the absolute worst moment of your life publicly, just for that slim chance that someone, somewhere, maybe a friend or relative of the killer, sees it and finally makes the call.
She knew exactly why she was doing it. She talked about needing closure, not just for herself, but for Jill-Lyn. She said, quote, I need, as Jill's mother, to know that she can rest in peace. I can look at her picture, and I can go see her at the cemetery and tell her, honey, we got him. It's okay now.
And then she added that heartbreaking line.
Because right now, it's not okay. That just perfectly captures the unending agony, the lack of peace for families whose loved ones' killers are still out there.
And her efforts, they did have an impact, right? The police acknowledged it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Law enforcement credited Joanne's persistence. Because of her relentless advocacy and the investigation it fueled, Jill-Lyn's case file became one of the largest the Syracuse Police Department had ever handled.
She never gave up. But all that effort, that constant emotional and physical strain, it eventually led to another just awful tragedy.
Yeah. This is the part of the story that's almost too cruel to comprehend. The horrific irony, we call it. The 2007 tragedy, a mother's death before her daughter's justice.
What happened?
So it's 2007. Joanne is still fighting for Jill-Lyn, but she's also just trying to survive, make ends meet.
Yeah.
Even though she was technically on disability leave because of the stress, she was taking on extra work. Landscaping jobs for a roofing company.
She's trying to get by.
Exactly. And on October 24th, 2007, while she was working on the roof of a place called Tobin's Garage, she fell 15 feet backwards, suffered catastrophic severe brain trauma.
Oh, no.
She's taken off life support, and she died the next morning, October 25th.
And the detail that makes it even more heartbreaking, the police confirmed it later, didn't they?
They did. A sergeant reported that Joanne had called the investigators for an update on Jill-Lyn's case that morning, just hours before her fatal accident, and she'd called the day before, too.
She died literally in the middle of fighting for her daughter. Her last conscious hours were spent pursuing the person who took Jill-Lyn's life.
Joanne Browning, the mother who refused to let silence win, died without ever getting that justice for her daughter. It's just devastating.
And the weight that puts on the surviving sister, Jill-Lyn Euto, I can't even fathom it. First, she loses her sister to this horrific violence. Then, 6 years later, she loses her mother in an accident that seems directly linked to the stress and the financial burden caused by that first tragedy.
The responsibility for seeking justice, that 24-year-long watch.
Yeah.
It fell entirely onto Jenna's shoulders after that.
It's an unimaginable generational burden, made even heavier knowing the person who started this whole chain of tragedy is still out there, free.
Which brings us to where the investigation stands now, or at least where it stood in recent years. Despite that massive case file Joanne helped build, the case is still officially unsolved 24 years later.
And that lack of resolution really highlights the kind of impasse that so often stalls cold cases, especially when it comes to crucial evidence like DNA. Let's call this part the DNA evidence that slept while justice waited.
Okay. So the Syracuse Police Department, they maintain the case is still open, it's active. A detective confirmed, as recently as 2021, that they won't stop working it until it's closed. They've gathered a huge amount of information over the years.
And we know they have people they're looking at, right? They've basically said as much.
Yeah, for years, police have acknowledged they have persons of interest, and even several people listed as suspects that they continue to monitor. But, suspecting someone and having enough evidence to actually arrest and convict them, those are two very different things.
That's the gap. They probably feel they understand the motive, the relationships, the proximity, but they're missing that definitive forensic link, the smoking gun needed for court.
And in a crime like this, so violent, so close contact, that missing link is almost certainly DNA evidence.
Since it was a stabbing, they definitely would have collected DNA at the scene, right? Blood, maybe skin cells under her fingernails, touch DNA on objects.
Absolutely. DNA was collected. But the problem was, for years, reportedly as of 19 years after the murder, there were no matches when they ran it through traditional databases like CODIS.
CODIS being the national database of DNA from convicted offenders and other unsolved crimes.
Exactly. So no match there usually means the killer wasn't already in the system for a prior serious offense, which is common in these someone she knew type cases. The killer might not have had a record before this.
But this is where technology comes in, right? This is where things have changed dramatically in recent years for cold cases. We call this the DNA revolution that could still speak for Jill-Lyn.
Precisely. In 2016, the Syracuse police made a really important announcement. They said they would be using the DNA evidence they collected way back in 2001 to build a suspect profile.
So they have a usable sample from the killer, a genetic blueprint.
It certainly sounds like a viable profile. The big question then became, okay, if CODIS didn't work, how do you use this profile to find the killer?
And the answer is forensic genetic genealogy, FGG.
That's the game changer. FGG. And, our listeners are pretty savvy about true crime, but it's worth quickly clarifying how it works because it's different from CODIS.
Right. It doesn't search criminal databases.
No. It searches public and sometimes private consumer genetic databases. Think Ancestry, DNA, 23andMe. Places where ordinary people upload their DNA voluntarily, usually just to find relatives or learn about their heritage.
So the police aren't looking directly for the killer in these databases. They're looking for the killer's relatives, like cousins.
Exactly. They upload the unknown killer's profile, and the FGG technology tries to find matches, people who share segments of DNA. How might identify distant cousins, maybe third or fourth cousins.
Okay, then what?
Then, highly specialized forensic genealogists get involved. They take those distant matches, and they build out massive family trees. Going back decades, sometimes centuries, they're looking for pathways, connections, trying to pinpoint a common ancestor, and then work forward to identify potential individuals who fit the likely profile.
Like, in this case, probably a male who was living in or had strong ties to the Syracuse area back in 2001.
Precisely. They narrow it down based on geography, age, gender likelihood, until they zero in on a potential suspect or family branch that warrants further traditional investigation like getting a direct DNA sample for comparison.
And the sources strongly suggest this is exactly what the police are doing in Jill-Lyn's case. We hear from online communities, like the Reddit detectives who follow these cases closely, that Jill-Lyn's sister herself indicated the police are basically waiting.
Yeah, the quote was something like, they're pretty much waiting for one of the suspect's family members to upload their DNA onto a genealogy site so they can prove it.
That phrase, so they can prove it, is really telling, isn't it?
It really is. It implies they likely do have a strong suspect or a very small pool of suspects identified through traditional detective work. And they're now using FGG as the final step, the confirmation tool. They're playing this waiting game, hoping an innocent relative, maybe a second cousin once removed who just got a DNA kit for Christmas, uploads their data and unknowingly provides that crucial link back to the killer. It's the modern technology fighting yesterday's monsters.
It's an incredible advancement. But while we focus on the tech, we also have to acknowledge the real-world challenges investigators face. Even with DNA and FGG, solving a 24-year-old case runs into huge systemic hurdles, what we're calling the cold case unit's impossible math.
Right. To really grasp the struggle, we can look at data from the National Institute of Justice, NIJ. Their research on cold cases paints a pretty stark picture of why cases like Jill-Lyn's, even with strong leads, often remain unsolved for so long.
Let's start with the most obvious factor, time. We know it's the enemy in these cases.
It's the biggest enemy. The NIJ findings are grimly specific. The likelihood of solving a homicide drops dramatically after just the first 72 hours.
72 hours, that's it.
Yeah, it's the critical window. After that, evidence degrades, witnesses move, relocate, forget details. Memories just fade incredibly fast. So for Jill-Lyn's case, being 24 years old now, the challenge is just exponentially greater.
Okay, what else makes a case harder to solve over time, according to the NIJ? What factors increase solvability early on?
Two key things really boost the odds if they happen in that initial 72-hour window. One, if investigators establish a clear motive right away. Two, if they identify and ideally secure a prime suspect very early on.
And in Jill-Lyn's case, they had the strong someone she knew theory, but they never made an arrest. So they likely didn't have enough hard evidence to legally call someone a prime suspect immediately. Or maybe they lacked the DNA tech back then to make the definitive link.
Probably a combination of both. They had strong suspicions, a likely profile, but not the concrete proof needed for an arrest warrant or charges that would stick.
And then there's the resource issue. Joanne Browning did so much to keep the case alive, but the police department itself needs dedicated funding and manpower for cold cases.
And that's often where the system really struggles. That NIJ survey, it found that very few police agencies across the country, only about 7%, actually have dedicated full-time cold case units.
Only 7%. Wow. So how do most departments handle them?
Usually on an ad hoc basis, detectives juggling them alongside their active caseload. And the funding, well, the median allocation specifically for cold case investigations reported in that survey was just $35,000.
$35,000 median for potentially multiple cold cases. When you think about how much DNA testing, forensic genealogy, travel, and just man-hours cost, that seems catastrophically low.
It's exactly what we mean by the funding gap, how budget cuts murder justice twice. It means the detectives working Jill-Lyn's huge file are probably also handling current homicides, robberies, assaults. They rely heavily on outside grants when they can get them. Or they wait for a major break in the case to justify pulling resources back onto it.
Like what kind of break?
Usually new witness information popping up unexpectedly, or critically, newly testable physical evidence becoming viable, like the DNA sample in Jill-Lyn's case, thanks to FGG. That makes the DNA strategy even more crucial here. It's potentially the only way to cut through the resource constraints imposed by the case's age and the lack of dedicated funding.
But even with FGG, success isn't guaranteed.
Not at all. We have to be realistic. The overall reported clearance rate for cold cases, even with modern tech, is still pretty low. Roughly only 1 in 5 gets solved. So Jill-Lyn's case is fighting against time, against systemic underfunding, and against those odds.
Which means the hope for justice really might rest on this almost passive strategy, waiting for the killer's silent betrayal to be exposed by the most random, accidental means. An innocent, unrelated relative just wanting to explore their family tree. It's incredible.
It really is. Which brings us to the final part of Jill-Lyn Euto's story. A life cut short, a mother lost fighting for answers, and a case that just refuses to fade away in the community or for the family left behind.
Yeah, even after 24 years, the specifics of this crime, the unlocked door, her own knife, the Super Bowl timing, the lack of witnesses, it keeps it alive in people's minds, doesn't it? There's that persistent feeling online and among observers, this case should be solvable. It feels so personal, so localized. The answer seems like it has to be close by.
That feeling that the perpetrator was likely known by Jill-Lyn, maybe even lived in the building or nearby, it makes the silence feel heavier, like someone is holding on to a terrible secret.
And we know Jill-Lyn's sister, Jenna, she's the one carrying that torch now, keeping her sister's name out there, keeping the case visible after losing both her sister and her mom in this long, grueling fight for answers.
Yeah, and when we talk about what families want, the word closure always comes up. But there was a really powerful quote from Bonnie Driscoll. She's another mother whose daughter's cold case was eventually solved after 13 years. She said, "Closure is not a real word in this department. No, you don't get closure. It's not there because the person doesn't come back."
That's powerful. So the goal isn't really emotional closure, because that's impossible. It's about accountability, justice.
Okay. Accountability. And that remains elusive in Syracuse for Jill-Lyn, which means we have to summarize the unanswered questions that still hang over this case. This 24-year silence that screams for breaking.
The biggest question is just, who did this?
Who was he? We keep coming back to the fact that the police, by saying they have suspects they monitor, by pursuing FGG, they strongly imply they have a pretty good idea who it might be. They've likely vetted the boyfriends, the exes, the friends, the neighbors. The frustration seems purely evidentiary. They're missing that final, legally admissible piece to connect the dots for a jury.
And just think about the killer's perspective for a moment. Walking around for 24 years, knowing the police might suspect them, knowing they have their DNA profile, And now knowing that their freedom basically hinges on whether some distant cousin decides to spit in a tube and mail it to Ancestry, that's got to be an unbelievable psychological pressure cooker.
It creates this strange, silent, terrifying dynamic, doesn't it? The FGG strategy allows police to keep that pressure on, constantly circling their suspects without having to show their hand until they have that conclusive match.
So Jill-Lyn Euto's story is still, tragically, the unfinished story. Why Jill-Lyn's case demands your voice today.
Absolutely. And the Syracuse Police Department is still officially asking for information. We want to encourage anyone listening, if you have any knowledge at all, maybe something that seemed insignificant back in 2001 or something you heard later about Jill-Lyn's life around that time, her relationships, maybe someone who seemed off or was acting strangely around 600 James Street on that Super Bowl Sunday, January 28th, 2001. Please reach out.
Yeah, even the smallest detail could be the piece they need. The contact info for the Syracuse Police Department's Cold Case Squad is still active. The phone number is 315-442-5234, or you can email them at coldcasesquad@syracusepolice.org. We'll put that in our show notes too.
So to wrap up this deep dive, Jill-Lyn Euto's murder was just this brutal act of extreme, very personal violence. And it happened under the cover of a national celebration. The crime scene itself, the unlocked door, her own knife used against her points overwhelmingly towards an act of betrayed trust, committed by someone she knew, someone she likely let into her apartment, fueled by some kind of deep personal rage.
And the fight for justice that followed tragically claimed the life of her devoted mother, Joanne Browning, who was just this relentless force for 6 years. The hope for answers now really rests heavily on modern DNA technology, on FGG, and that possibility that an innocent relative somewhere will unknowingly provide the key to unlock this decades-old secret.
But let's leave you, our listener, with this final kind of chilling thought to consider. If the police really do believe they know who the killer is, and they're just waiting for that familial DNA match, think about the ripple effects. What happens to those innocent relatives when they find out that their simple curiosity about their own ancestry ended up exposing a violent killer within their family tree? What kind of psychological burden does that discovery place on them?
That's a heavy thought, and maybe even more immediate. We have to ask. Someone capable of that kind of savage personal violence, that absolute vengeance her uncle described, did they just stop being dangerous after they walked out of that apartment on Super Bowl Sunday? What level of silent, ongoing risk has this killer posed the community for the last 24 years, potentially hiding in plain sight?
The need for accountability here feels incredibly urgent, even after all this time. If you found this deep dive compelling, please help us keep Jill-Lyn's story visible. Share this episode.
And please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whisper of Crime. Make sure you turn on that notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives into interesting and sometimes really scary crime stories that need justice.
You can also find us and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, pretty much everywhere you get your podcasts. Check out our previous episodes too. And please like this deep dive and leave a comment. Your engagement truly helps amplify these cases and keeps hope alive for families like Jill-Lyn's.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into an unfinished story. We'll be back next time with another case that demands attention.